Hello, how are you doing? I am finally coming to the end of a very busy work stint, so I am so excited to just sit down and read and relax and escape from the world. And I have a big group of new books that have just been published in March to choose from, so I'm going to go through and discuss them all. I'd love to know from you if you could pick any one of these books to just say, you know what, world, I'm going to just check out for several hours and go and read this and leave everything behind. Which of these books would you choose? Let me know about that in the comments below, or just let me know about which of these books you're most interested in reading, or if you've read any of them and would recommend them. So starting off, there's the book The Trees by Percival Everett, and I have heard so many good things about this novel that I'm really eager to get to it. It's the story of a murder that occurs in Mississippi, and so this group of detectives from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation go to investigate it, and then there are a series of more murders, and there's a mystery around these murders because alongside the bodies, they find a second body of someone that strangely resembles somebody that was lynched in Mississippi many years ago, and looks very similar to that person. And this just doesn't just occur in Mississippi, it occurs all across America. And so, yeah, there's a whole mystery of what's going on here. It's meant to be a very fast-paced and thrilling read, but also a really meaningful and insightful one. And yeah, I'm so excited to read this finally. Ghosts of Spring by Louis Carrasco, and this seems very appropriate to be published at this time of year now that we're just out of winter, and here in England at least, it's become very warm. And this is about a young anonymous girl who is impoverished and living on her own, living by her wits out in the West Country of England, and just scrounging for a living. And it's about how she's trying to transcend her circumstances to move on to something else in her life. It's quite a short novel, so I think this would be a good book to you could sit down and probably read it all over the course of a single day if you didn't have anything else going on that day. This is a short story collection that I am thrilled to receive because it is by Mayhew Bergman, that wrote this short story collection called Almost Famous Women, that in the year that it came out, I loved it so much. It was one of my favorite books of the year. Her short stories are so powerful and pointed and just create a whole world. And this new collection of short stories and a novella is called How Strange a Season. And it is a collection about a number of different women that are struggling with different issues to do with inheritance, whether it's the history of their community or their country, or the environmental issues that they've inherited, or issues to do with their families or relationships. And so, yeah, quite a whole range of subject matter, of course, because it's a whole short story collection. But yeah, I just love her writing, and I'm so grateful that this was sent to me all the way from America here in the UK, because I don't think it's been published here in the UK yet, and so it has these deckled edges, which we don't get over here in England. Vagabonds! Exclamation mark by Eloghosa Osunde, and this is a novel, although I've heard it described as almost more a collection of short stories, because it's about a whole range of individuals in Nigeria and Lagos that have been labeled as vagabonds, which in Nigeria means they are gay, lesbian, transgendered, or queer. And of course, this is a big political issue in Nigeria, and queer activity is illegal and can be punished in prison. And so it's a book that is about a whole range of individuals that have been labeled this, but they also some of them are some of the stories and sections are slightly supernatural, and I think it involves a number of ghosts and, ooh, there's a siren going by. It sounds so fascinating and like such an important story to tell about the world today. Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer. And this is quite a long debut novel that also has a slightly, I think, like supernatural theme to it, in that it's about a character named Leah that feels like there's been a presence inside of her throughout her entire life. And as it goes through her story, secrets from her pasts are uncovered, and it's described as a coming-of-age tale that occurs at the end of a life, which is a really curious way to put it. And this had some spectacular endorsements from people such as Megan Hunter, who's a writer. I've really enjoyed her writing before, and she calls this a beautiful novel about death that feels completely alive, pulsing with tenderness and wit. Next, I have 3 different historical novels that all involve very famous historical figures in them in some way, and I love when historical fiction weaves in, the lives of real life prominent figures from history. And first off, there's a novel called Sell Us the Rope by Stephen May, which is about Stalin, young Stalin, when he was living in London and making different connections with communist figures and trying to shore up power for himself in a bid for control. That sounds like such a fascinating story, because I don't really know anything about Stalin's early life, so I think this will give a fascinating glimpse on that. Next is the big new novel Booth by Karen J. Fowler, which tells the story of John Booth, who, as an American being raised very aware of that history of the man who assassinated President Lincoln, and in a theater, and it shows his story and his family's story leading up until that point. And this sounds so good, and I love this author's novel, We Are Completely Beside Ourselves. And I was really gutted recently because the publisher got in touch with me and invited me to interview the author, but I've been so busy with work that I just haven't had time to read this yet, and wouldn't have had time to prepare to do an interview with her. But I would have loved to, because I think her writing is so good, and I am really eager to read this. And then there is The Great Passion by James Runcie, and in this novel it is the year 1726 in Leipzig, and an 11-year-old boy that shows a lot of musical promise is brought to a great musical master as an apprentice, and that great musician is Bach, and Bach is composing one of the great pieces of music in all of history, and so that boy is witness to that. And that sounds like such a fascinating way into this story. Groundskeeping by Lee Cole, and this is a novel about a man named Owen who's had a very rough time in his 20s, and so he moves back to his hometown to work at a small college in the foothills of the Appalachians as a groundskeeper, and there he meets a woman named Alma, who is the daughter of Bosnian immigrants and comes from a liberal background and is trying to start her writing career, and they form a relationship with each other. And so it's about life and art, and it just sounds really good. And the recent winner of the Rathbones Folio Prize, Callum Tobin, says of this book, it is scrumptiously perceptive. Groundskeeping is filled with close observation, detailed shading. It is an absorbing love story, but it is also an examination of class in America, and it captures with sharp insight a moment in recent history. Exactly What Do You Mean by Ben Hinshaw, and this is a novel that takes place in 3 different locations and is about the stories of 3 different sets of characters. So it takes place in Guernsey, where there's a teenager that discovers a secret. It takes place in London, where a couple their marriage is troubled by infidelity. And it also takes place in California, where a veteran is trying to overcome the horrors of war. And their stories intersect in a kind of surprising way. And it's funny reading the biography of this author, because he is also someone that has lived in Guernsey, in London, and in California. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he draws upon his experience to create these very different environments in his novel. At the Table by Claire Powell. Doesn't this have an amazing cover? So this is about a couple that have lived together and been married to each other for 30 years, and they sort of seem like the perfect suburban couple, but then they announce to their adult children that they are divorcing, and this causes the children to question their expectations about relationships and their own desires. The daughter of the family, she's pursuing an ex that she'd broken up with for a long time ago, and the son feels like he is entering into a marriage that he's not sure he really wants. So it's exploring these like different relationship issues and how our relationships with our own families affect our ideas about that. Oval by Elvia Wilk, or as I would like naturally want to pronounce this novel, Oval, because I used to live in this section of London called Oval, around a tube station called the Oval, and we once heard somebody pronounce it Oval, and so we just started pronouncing it that way all the time. But this doesn't have anything to do with that, because this actually takes place in Berlin in a time when there's increasing ecological disturbance and economic disparity, and it follows a couple that lives in an eco house on a new artificial mountain, but then things start to go haywire in this new eco house, and one of the characters, he works at a company that is developing this pill called Oval that is meant to increase people's generosity, and they see this as a solution to give to people to fix this issue to do with economic disparity. So yeah, it sounds like such a fascinating story. The author Ned Bowman describes this as a fabulous biopunk hybrid that's not quite like anything else I've read before. Mischief Acts by Zoe Gilbert, and this sounds like such a fascinating, bizarre novel. It's about a shapeshifter and a mischief maker that travels throughout the centuries, causing havoc in different periods of time, and is also being pursued by their maker. So yeah, I think it's this sort of examination of like different periods of time and things that chaotic things that occur in these different periods of time. And I do love the idea of historical novels that take characters that are able to like transcend through different centuries of time. I think that's a really fascinating concept, and I've not read this author before, but I remember hearing a lot of great things about her previous book called Folk, which was also meant to be very unique. But yeah, it sounds like such an interesting story. Anthem by Noah Hawley, and this takes place in America that's overrun with environmental disaster and opioid addiction and poverty. But it's about the son of a super rich person that's sent to this special center where he meets somebody called the Prophet that enlists him to join him on a very special mission, and it's about that journey. It's called an epic literary thriller. Peach Blossom Spring by Melissa Fu, and this is called a multi-generational epic tale, and I love a multi-generational tale, and the time period it spans is from World War II in China to post Cold War America, and it's about a young mother in China that has a young son, and amidst the war she flees the country and moves to America there to raise her son, and her son has a child, and that child naturally wants to learn more about their heritage, their Chinese heritage, but their father refuses to speak about it. So it's following these stories across the generations, and yeah, sounds so good. Next, I have reprints of classic novels by Jane Bowles, and these were first published in the 1960s. And I had first read Two Serious Ladies when early in my 20s, and just really enjoyed it. It's such a mind-bending experience, and it's hard to describe quite what it's like. It's very unusual writing, like any other I've read. It's about two women, obviously. One is an eccentric heiress, and another is a dutiful wife. And there's a scene in this, an early scene from in the character's childhood that is just so vivid in my memory and mind, and I think back on it like quite often, like weirdly. Yeah, it's just really stuck with me. And then there's also a reprint of her book Plain Pleasures, which I've never read before. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. And these reprints come with introductions. So Two Serious Ladies comes with an introduction by Nisha Dolan, the Irish author, and Plain Pleasures comes with an introduction by Chris Power. And also Ali Smith says of Jane Bowles, readers who've not yet read Jane Bowles are almost to be envied, like people who've still to read Austen or Mansfield or Woolf and have all the delight, the literary satisfaction, the shock of classic originality, the revelation of such good writing still to come. And yeah, I totally agree, because yeah, Two Serious Ladies is such a unique reading experience. So I'm really looking forward to revisiting this and reading Plain Pleasures for the first time. Next, I have two nonfiction books that coincidentally are both about journeys across England and Great Britain, and exploring different aspects of their past. So first is Shadowlands by Matthew Green, which is subtitled A Journey Through Lost Britain. And it is literally exploring these towns that have been lost, that either sank into sand or fell off from a cliff, or just completely disappeared and were like abandoned over time. And I think it's so fascinating to have this like look at towns that have just completely disappeared from the landscape. And then there's a book called An English Library Journey by John Bevis. And in this, he took it upon himself to journey across the country to visit all different public libraries to see what issues they're encountering and to discover the different rich beauty that they encompass. And so, yeah, he surveys across the country and gives little accounts of that, which is such a great idea and would make such a fascinating project. And I wish I'd thought of it first. And naturally, I flipped through to look at my local library, and yes, it is there. And he talks about issues that I know my local library has been facing recently. So yeah, this sounds so good. And I have a couple of poetry collections. So first is Limbic by Peter Scalpello, and this is a collection that is all about queer desire and discovery, from chemsex parties to domestic situations. And yeah, it sounds so good. And the author Niven Govindan, whose writing I love, says of this book, all the superlatives for Peter Scalpello's tender poems, I can't stop thinking about them. Then there is the poetry collection Distant Transit by Maja Haderlap, and it's translated from the German by Tess Lewis. And these are poems which are all about language and the way in which language impacts our lives, how it carries our heritage when language is taken from us and we're forced to speak another language, how that impacts our lives. And the author was born in a Slovenian-speaking minority community and was forced to adopt another language. So I think that that really influences a lot of these poems. Next, I have two nonfiction works that are both about the process of writing itself from established writers. So first off, there is Body Work by Melissa Fabos, which is subtitled The Radical Power of Personal Narrative, which is about how we bring our own personal experiences into our creative writing, whether it's the fiction that's created is quite like literally autobiographical, or to what degree do we use the imagination to create this fiction, and what that says about our experiences and how we like filter and translate our experiences into this fiction, which I think sounds like a really fascinating examination. And then there is In the Margins by Elena Ferrante, and this is a very short essay collection of only 4 essays where this famous author describes her experiences and her struggles with becoming a writer, her influences as a writer, but also as a reader. So yeah, I think it'll be really fascinating insight into her process. I have to admit, I shamefully have still never read any Elena Ferrante. I know I really ought to, and there should be a period where I just completely throw myself into her books. But so yeah, really want to get to that. But I think it'd be interesting to approach it first by like reading about her writing process and then going on to read her novels. And finally, there's the memoir, The Dragons, the Giant, the Women by Waiatu Moore. And this is about the author's own story of growing up in Liberia. And when she was a 5-year-old girl, civil war broke out in the country and her family was forced to flee. She moved to America, where her family was, where she was separated from her mother, and it follows her dramatic story. And I've just heard so many good things about this memoir that I'm really looking forward to finally reading it. So those are all the books. Yeah, a lot to choose from. But like I said, I'd love to know in the comments if there's especially like one of these books that you just like want to grab and like sit down with for a long period of time, or if there's like a number of books that you are really keen to read, please let me know about that. Or if you've recently acquired any good new books that you want to recommend to me and let me know about, please let me know about that in the comments below. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to some good, relaxing reading time after a really long period of very hard work. So I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.